So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katherine Skilling, and welcome to my session, Finding My Way, Who Am I, and What Can I Offer? So just to get the logistics out of the way, if you do have any questions or comments as I go through the session, feel free to post them in the Q&A or chat feature on the platform, and then I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the session. Should have around 10 minutes for Q&A time if needed at the end. So when I originally created this session for the London VMUG in April this year, I wanted to try and share some of the information and techniques I'd learned over the past couple of years. In particular, as I attempted to try and change my mindset from being very negative to having a much more positive outlook. However, knowing that I'm not an expert in any of those subject areas, and it can also be quite a dry subject to try and present on, I made the decision to set it into the context of my own personal journey instead. So this session still follows that format and content of that original session, as I don't want to lose the key points of the story that I'm trying to share. However, I've tweaked it slightly to bring it up to date. So today I'm going to share the story of my journey with you. This is Finding My Way, Who Am I, and What Can I Offer? For anybody that doesn't know me, I work at VMware as a staff consultant in the Northern EMEA PSO team, and I'm based out of the southeast of the UK, where I've been in the job now for just under 5 years. I focus primarily on the automation and orchestration toolsets. However, my background started in end user support and then went into infrastructure before finally moving into virtualization. You can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, and also have my own blog. I do welcome new connections, so please feel free to reach out to me. And outside of work, I'm passionate about football, where I play for a ladies veterans team in 5- and 7-side tournaments. So this is my story. And my story begins in 2018. And I'm in Barcelona working as part of the hands-on labs team at VMworld. At this point in time, I've been in my job for around 2.5 years. Based on the feedback I've been getting from my manager, my customers, and my peers, everything's going well. I'm doing a good job. But I'm finding I'm starting to get a little bit bored, and I don't know why. The buzz factor's gone from the job, and I can't figure out what it is that's missing and where it's gone. It just feels like I'm stuck in a rut. I'm not progressing, and if I look to the future, I can't see how anything is going to change. And while about in Barcelona, one of the members of staff had arranged for Robin Matlock, who was the Chief Marketing Officer of VMware at the time, come and speak to the female members of staff. She was just going to share her story for what it was like being a very high profile female in her case, working in the male dominated industry. Now, I'll admit, this is a kind of session I'll normally avoid because I really don't like being singled out for the fact that I'm female in what is still a predominantly male industry. All I want is to blend in and let my work be done for itself. I also didn't really understand at the time that how diversity and inclusion or promoting change could be achieved by getting a group of females together to talk with other females and come up with ideas on how to make things better. It just didn't work for me. So I planned to skip the session. It's the end of my shift and I'm going to go out to dinner with my friends instead. And as I'm heading towards the exit of the arena, one of my colleagues, Kim Delgado, spots me, and she reminds me that the session with Robin is about to take place and where it's happening. So now I'm kind of stuck, because I can't realistically leave when Kim knows I was there literally just before the session with Robin started. And so I end up attending. If I look back now, I'm actually quite glad that Kim did spot me, because it ends up being a bit of a turning point for me. So Robin's sharing a story which is quite interesting, and she raises the study she'd recently come across that showed that females will feel that they need to wait until they can meet 75% of the requirements on a job application or specification before they'll actually consider applying. Males, on the other hand, will only feel the need to wait till they can meet 25%, be comfortable that they can cover the rest of the requirements at interview if needed, and they'll apply. Now, that's obviously a very stereotypical thing to say. There will absolutely be males that fall into that 75% category and females that fall into the 25% category. However, this study had shown that the majority of females were in that 75% category. And I'm sat there listening to this, and I suddenly realised, that's me. I do that. I wouldn't even have applied for my current role at VMware if I hadn't been introduced to the company as part of an employee referral. I only really went along to the interview because I wanted the experience, as I was unhappy in my current role. I didn't realistically think I had a chance to get in the job. There was just that real slim possibility that for some reason they would decide I was good enough and offer me a role maybe. And then I realised I was still doing it now because I've determined that there's no chance of progression in my current role, no chance of promotion, nothing's going to change in the future. Yet I haven't even discussed the subject with my manager. I've just assumed that I can't tick all those requirements to meet that particular box, and so I've ruled it out. So now I have a problem. because I'm too scared to ask my manager about promotion. So to put it into context, all our one-to-ones to this point in time had been nice, polite, friendly conversations over the phone. We meet once a month, we talk about what I'm currently working on, what the football results were at the weekend, maybe when I plan to go on holiday, and that's about it. You know, as I say, nice, polite, friendly conversations, what I'd later come to term as fluffy conversations. There's no real substance or purpose to them. My manager is basically forcing me to have a one-to-one because he knows otherwise I just wouldn't bother, as at that time I didn't see the point of them. So now I'm scared about what his reaction will be if I do actually raise that subject of promotion with him. So just like the quote on the slide, I'm thinking, what happens if he just immediately turns around and says, no, that I'm not good enough, it's not possible? What if he goes silent on the other end of the phone when I raise it and just doesn't say anything at all? What if he simply laughs at the idea? It's all negative thoughts, all negative responses. Not once I've actually stopped to consider that my manager has a lot more professionalism and respect than that. And that actually he might have a positive answer to share with me. So when I come home from Barcelona, I find I'm still debating this thought in my head. It's going round and round and round. I can't stop thinking about it and it's driving me nuts. And in the end, I decide that I'm going to have to ask the question. Even if it turns out to be a negative response, at least I'll know. I'll be able to move past it. So I decide I have to ask him. And so my next one-to-one, which is still a phone call, I pluck up the courage and I ask him. I literally blurt out before he can interrupt me. I want to talk about promotion. I'm not saying I've got to have it right now. I'm leaving. I'm not saying I deserve it right now, but I want to know what it looks like and I want to know how far away I am from it. Literally, as quick as I can, get it out of it. And to my immense relief, his reaction is really positive. He tells me, I'm so glad you decided to raise this. I've been trying to get you to open up for so long now and tell me about where you see yourself going and what your future plans are. But it feels like every time I try and raise that conversation with you, you literally clam up, slam the door closed and shut down the conversation. I'm so glad you decided you're finally ready to talk about it. Says, let's arrange to meet in person in the office. We'll sit down for a couple of hours and we'll work our way through the career matrix and then figure out a plan of action as to where we go from there. And so we do. So we meet in the office probably a couple of weeks later and we sit down and go through that career matrix. Now, within VMware and PSO in particular, there's a very well-defined career matrix that sets out each of the different requirements for the various roles, and then each of the different grades within those roles. As we start to go through the requirements, it becomes quite apparent that, as far as I'm concerned, you can divide them into two very distinct categories. Anything that relates to the technical side of the job in terms of keeping my skills up to date, getting certifications, delivering customer projects, delivering across multiple technology stacks, no problems, ticking most of the boxes, nailing it, nothing that really needs working on. Anything that relates to the wider community piece or the personal development side around giving back, sharing my knowledge, delivering presentations, getting involved in initiatives that promote the VMware and PSO brands, ticking at most one or two boxes, barely scratching the surface. And I say to my manager, well, you know, VMware pays me to be the technical expert. You send me out to customers who pay for my time as that technical subject matter expert. So why would I spend my time focusing on these optional items? They're not part of the day job. It's not what you pay me for. I mean, even my bonus is primarily tied to delivering customer projects. And my manager tells me that the world has moved on from what I consider to be my viewpoint of the day job. And that actually now, particularly within VMware, you have to have this concept of going above and beyond. You have to do more than just delivering those customer projects. And those things that I've labeled as optional really aren't. They're part of the day job as well, and I should already be doing them. And so as the session continues, my manager also tells me a few home truths. So the first truth I learn is I need to dial down my cynical side. Now, I'll admit, I am an extremely cynical person. It's genetic. And I don't always take the time to think before I allow that cynicism to just flow out of my mouth. And my manager raises an example from a little while ago at this point in time of a check-in form we used to have to submit on a quarterly basis on our internal system before we moved to the more structured monthly one-to-ones. And at this particular time, I was in a fairly negative place from a personal point of view. I was assigned to a project on my own, working in the middle of nowhere in Ireland. I didn't feel like the customer was really interested in the work I was delivering, and it wasn't on my chosen technology stack. I hadn't wanted to pick up the project in the first place, and so I kind of felt like I'd just been forced into delivering it because the circumstances had dictated that it was the right thing for my team at that time. And so when this check-in form comes along, I just allow my cynicism to have free reign over it, hit the submit button, and think nothing else of it. And my manager points out to me that I need to take the time to stop and think. I need to think about who the audience is going to be that's going to receive that communication, in this case, that check-in form. He points out that those forms are seen by some very senior managers within VMware, and that they may not actually know who I am as an individual. And now all they may remember me by or associate my name with is that real negativity, that cynicism I've just left all the way down the page. He says, is that really what you want people to think about you or remember about you? Just that real negativity, that cynicism. As we continue to discuss the different areas I need to work on, the subject again of VCDX comes up. And at this point in time, I am completely against the idea. I just cannot see any benefits from it for the amount of time and effort it's going to require to get it. And my manager has the completely opposite viewpoint. And as he's trying to get me to be more open and to consider his side and his viewpoint, I reached a stage where I just can't be bothered to talk about it anymore. I'm getting bored. I can't be bothered to argue anymore. So I just say, yep, okay, I'll do it, thinking we'll just move on. And apparently my manager had voodoo skills and was reading me like a book. So as he puts it, you're saying one thing to me and your body language is screaming the complete opposite. I refer to it as voodoo skills because we haven't really met very often in person. And I've never really previously experienced somebody being able to read my body language in that way, to be so clear about the fact that I was absolutely still against the idea and I was just saying yes to go along with it. And so it was quite a surprise for me. And it was obviously something I need to be more careful about going forwards. And then as the session comes towards a close, my manager poses the question to me of, do I know what makes me unique as an individual? What do I bring to the team as an individual? And I say, well, there's nothing really special about me. I mean, I suppose I'm good at my job. I guess my technical skills are above average. But the only thing that really sets me apart is I get my head down and I work damn hard to deliver the job. And he tells me I need to get that idea out of my head, that I'm brilliant. And it's not just because, as I put it, I work damn hard. And if I can't see that about myself, how am I going to get other people to see it about me? So as I'm driving home from the office that day and I get stuck in a traffic jam, and as often happens, my mind starts to wander. I go onto autopilot and I realize I've heard something very similar before. So in my previous role before I joined VMware, we used to have to collect feedback from people we were working on around our yearly performance reviews. And one of the people who provided feedback for me had said I had all the ability and talent to do whatever I wanted to. However, I'd struggle to achieve my goals if I didn't allow people to see just how good I really was. And it strikes me that my managers are now telling me something very similar in just a slightly different way. I've got two people in two different scenarios basically saying something very similar, that I have this talent or this ability and potential, and I'm not fulfilling it. And it makes me start to wonder whether there's some truth to it, and I just can't see it about myself. So in the next few weeks, we pull together a plan of action and formalize it into a personal development plan or a PDP. And we agree with myself and my manager that the most logical place to start is we're getting an idea of what my strengths are. And he suggests I get some form of psychometric profiling done to really understand what my personality is, what my strengths are, how they fit together, and then what I can bring to the table as an individual, since it's clear I can't see what value I bring. And so the way VMware does this is via an internal course called Original Genius. So although Original Genius is run internally just within VMware, it's run by a third-party organization and they offer courses externally as well. And the HBDI model I'm about to introduce is available industry-wide, so there's nothing unique about that to VMware. So the Original Genius course introduces a few different things. It went through the principle of why and the golden circle that I'd been through on a previous course. And it also introduced the super chickens theory. And if you haven't come across that one before, I really recommend that you look it up. So there's a TED talk by Margaret Heffernan that's available on YouTube. And if anyone needs the link, let me know and I can send it through. It's about 15 minutes in length, but the first 5 minutes is enough to get an idea of what the principle's about. So the first thing that really stuck with me though from the course was this principle of HBDI model, or whole brain thinking as they termed it. And HBDI stands for the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument Model. And the idea is that everybody has a different or a preferred way of thinking. And based on your preferred approach, you sit in one of the 4 different quadrants on the grid. So it could be that you sit in the experimental area, the yellow area, and you think in terms of the big picture. Or it could be that you're more logical, you sit within the green structured part of the brain. And on the course, they play a game with you. So across all the tables in the room, they scatter a set of different coloured cards, and each card has a word written on it. Without telling you what the words or the colours are all about, they ask you to go around the room and pick up 5 cards. And those 5 cards should have words written on that you would either associate yourself with or you would say describe you. And then they ask you to rank those 5 cards in order of the ones that are most like you and just to keep your top 3. They then lay down a mat on the floor that has this exact same grid printed on it and ask you to go and stand on the colour for which you hold the most cards in your hand. Or if you have an even split between the different colours, then you stand on the lines between the different colours. So when I did this on the course, I'd picked up 2 green cards and 1 blue. As I started to explain what the different colours meant and reveal the traits and behaviours associated with them, I'm looking down the list of the green and the blue and I'm thinking, yeah, I quite like that. That's me. That describes me pretty well. If I'd just seen this grid and someone had asked me what I thought I'd say, I probably would have chosen the green or the blue. There's nothing really in the yellow or the red that I would say describes me. So I'd picked up 2 green cards, 1 blue. So industrious, controlled, and enthusiastic were the words that I had chosen. So I'm completely left side of that table, the rational part of the brain. And that makes sense to me because I'm very fact-driven, very logical in how I think. And if I look down the green section, I'm very disciplined and very risk-averse as well. There's nothing here really in the red or the yellow that I would say that fits with me. I wouldn't describe myself as being a particularly imaginative person, and I've definitely never described myself as being a very emotional person either. So it's all starting to make sense. And explain on the course that you have a light and a dark side to your personality. So your light side is everything under the skills and style section for your dominant colour. It's everything good we see about ourselves and what we see about other people that share that same colour dominance as us. They say we find it easiest to communicate with people who share that same colour dominance. And that's because we have those traits in common. So we see the same good things about each other. We have things in common. It's easy to communicate. But they also explain that you have a dark side, and that's the can appear section at the bottom of your dominant colour. And that we have the most difficulty communicating with people who sit diagonally opposite us on the grid. And that's because they see our dark side and we see theirs. So while I see myself as being very fact-driven, very logical, very precise, they may see me as being quite rigid or short-term focused. And the fact that I need proof before I'll accept an answer, which is absolutely true. I won't just trust my gut and make a decision based on whether it simply feels right. I want the facts and figures to back it up before I'll agree to it. And so I ask a lot of questions. And the reason they explain about this is because they say that the most productive teams have been shown to contain people who represent each of the 4 colours on the grid. And that's because you then all bring a diverse way of thinking to the table, so you're more productive. But given we struggle to communicate with people who sit diagonally opposite us on the grid, we need to be careful not to jump to conclusions or make assumptions about how other people are approaching a situation. We need to learn to be aware of how other people think and try to find that common middle ground between our approaches so we can be more productive. So this course is proving to be a truly enlightening event for me. At this point, I can actually start to understand how it all fits together. I'm able to process this information I'm seeing, and this explanation of how my brain thinks is actually starting to make sense to me. I can grasp the concept. And before I got on the training course, I'd agreed with my manager to go through that more extensive report, that psychometric profiling. The idea was that the training course would introduce those kind of key areas. It would introduce you to the HBDI model and some other things. But the more extensive report would actually give me my own individual details and show me exactly how I fitted into the grid. And so that light bulb moment came for me when I got that extensive report back. So this is me on the slide. This is how my brain thinks. And you can see there are actually 2 diagrams. So the solid line is my normal style when I'm just going about my everyday business. And the dotted line is my style under stress or when I'm under pressure. You can see in my case, they're very similar. There's not a great deal of difference between them. The only real difference is that when I'm under stress, I go even more into the blue section. So I get even more fact-driven and even less in the red, the emotional side. So I'm looking for those facts, those figures, those processes, the logical steps I can take to try and find a solution. So only when I can't find any other possibility do I consider maybe what my gut feels or what the emotional side of the situation is. As I'm reading through the details of this report, I realised it backed up something I'd had done on another training course, where I'd had an emotional intelligence report or an EIQ report completed. And that had shown that I scored really highly for problem solving and stress tolerance areas. Well, absolutely, green-blue is all about the problem solving. And then the stress tolerance, well, there's not much of a difference between my 2 approaches. You can see my brain doesn't really change how it processes that information when I'm under stress, so I handle it quite well. So that backs it up. But it also showed that I scored lowly for the emotional self-awareness and emotional expression areas. Well, again, it backs up the HBDI model because that's the red section of the grid, and that's where I score lowest. And it also makes sense because they say in the HPDI model that your brain processes information from your most dominant color round to your least dominant. So in my case, I go from the blue to the green to the yellow to the red. It's only if I cannot find any other solution do I then consider that emotional side of it. So that backs up that emotional intelligence report. So everything's now starting to point in the same direction. A bit like that feedback, I've now got 2 different profiles completed using unique approaches, and they're coming out with the same results. I'm starting to believe what I'm seeing, and I'm beginning to be able to see how this actually impacts me. There's one other area of the course that made a big impact on me, and that was the idea of small changes. So small changes isn't an idea they come up with just for this training course. It's been around for some time and is often referred to as marginal gains. And the example they use on the course to introduce it is the British cycling team, or Team GB as they're known, when they compete in the Olympics, and how they use the concept of marginal gains to get a competitive edge that ultimately led to their most successful period. So in the case of the British cycling team, they didn't look to make big changes to how they recruited or trained their cyclists. Instead, they looked at things they were already doing to see if they could make small changes to make them that little bit better that could give them that competitive edge. And the idea is quite simple. It's that it's more effective to do 100 things 1% better than it is to try and do that one thing 100% better. And that's because if you think about it, it's easier to commit to making these lots of little changes rather than trying to go for that one big change and try and stick with it. So in the example of Team GB, they introduced a cyclist to a hand washing expert to teach them how to wash their hands properly, all pre-COVID days, obviously. Marginal gain they would get is that the reduction in the amount of time that cyclists couldn't train or couldn't train at full capacity due to illnesses such as the common cold. They also started taking a team of chefs with them whenever they travelled to events abroad. Marginal gain was the cyclists were guaranteed a nutritional meal that met their individual needs every time, and a reduction in the risk of things like food poisoning affecting their schedules. So while on their own, these things don't seem to make much of a difference, if you start to add more and more of them over time, you get that snowball effect and they start to increase exponentially in terms of the results. And I recognised at the end of the course that this was something that I could do. I would be able to identify just those 1 or 2 small changes, either in my current approach to things or in the skills, or maybe 1 or 2 opportunities, and I could work on making them better. So my next task was to figure out where to start. So the first area I identified was trust. So having taken that first step to have that honest conversation with my manager, I decided I needed to continue that process and I needed to learn to trust him. Now, to be fair to my manager, Tim, there was never a trust issue on his side of the equation. It was always on mine. I don't trust people easily, and it's something I haven't quite worked out the reasons for, but I can be quite guarded about what I do and don't allow people to know about me or know about my abilities. And I've described myself before as being a bit like a castle with a drawbridge. So if you're inside the castle walls, obviously you're safe and you're in that trusted zone, so no problems. But I can make it really difficult for you to get there because obviously I can raise that drawbridge and I can lock the castle gates at any time without giving you any notice. So this was obviously the something I needed to work on. And it was going to be my first change. I needed to learn to trust other people better. I was going to start with my manager and then look to expand to my colleagues and wider community eventually. So I also needed to trust my colleagues better. And I look back now, and I say this because I was a team player, but if I'm honest, I only really did the bare minimum that was required. If somebody asked me for help, I made myself available. I would help them. I wasn't, anti-teamwork or anything like that, but I didn't really go above and beyond to help my team. So this is something I needed to change about myself. As that feedback told me, if I wanted to achieve my goals, I needed to learn to trust that other people would be there to help me if I actually asked them to do so. And it didn't help as well that the culture at my previous employer before I joined VMware was very different. So I often felt like I was just a number in a team of people assigned to a manager. I wasn't an individual, just that number. And I had to work with some people who were quite honestly only out looking for themselves, and they didn't care what the impact was on other people. And we also had frequent reorganisations. So by the end of my time there, I was getting a new line manager at least every 6 months. So there was never any point in building that time and effort to build that trust with that manager, because come the end of the appraising year, they've gone and you've got someone new and you had to start all over again. So this is something that's going to be very new to me. So this was to be my first small change. I was going to look to gradually build my trust with other people. I was going to start with my manager, then with my teammates, and finally with that wider community. Second small change I identified was try to say yes to more things and not to instantly say no or it's not for me. So being very cynical makes me quite negative, and I've found that I've just been dismissing ideas or opportunities as I can't see past the possible negative outcomes. I'm also paranoid about what people would think about me and what they would say if I did try something and it didn't work out. So I suffered from that paranoia and it was holding me back. I needed to try and take that advice from my manager, Tim, on board and dial down my cynical side and allow myself to actually consider opportunities rather than just instantly saying no to them. So I decided to use an approach I'd learned on another training course, and the course was called Authentic Leading Women, which was completely external to VMware. And although the course I attended was run purely for females, they do all male and mixed audience equivalents of the course as well. And the approach didn't have a funky name as far as I remember. I just remember it as being ABCDE. So the A stands for activating event. And this is the thing that's starting the process. So this could be something that you're debating now in terms of a decision, an opportunity you're considering, or it could be something that's happened in the past that you're looking back on and trying to figure out if there was anything you could have done better or done differently. The B stands for beliefs and self-talk. And that's that little voice in your head that's telling you all the negative stuff. And in my case, it's a very loud voice. It's screaming at me how, it's all going to go wrong, all the negative stuff, it's going to end up in a disaster, burning heap of mess of the floor, and what people are going to say about me if I do actually do this. So it's all the negative stuff that's going on. That's what stands for the B. The C is the consequences. So given all that self-talk that you're going through, what are the consequences or conclusions of that going to be? And how's that going to leave you feeling? So it's important to understand that as you're going through this process, this is kind of your instant gut reaction. You're putting down on paper or in your head what you're instantly thinking. You jump into an awful lot of assumptions and conclusions as you're going through this process, rather than necessarily taking the time to consider the cold, hard facts. The D stands for debate, dispute, and discard. And the way they explain this on the course is you're sat around a table with all your friends and family, and they're all really positive people. There's no negativity about them whatsoever. And you're telling them all about your tale of woe, what's happened to you through this ABC stages and how it's left you feeling. And their role is that they're debating all those assumptions you're making. They're disputing the conclusions and the consequences that you've jumped to. And they're telling you to discard all that negativity, those assumptions, and look at the facts of the situation. The E stands for effects. And this is the outcome effectively of having gone through that ABCD stages. So it could still be negative at this point because obviously not everything has a positive outcome. But the chances are it's still going to be a lot more positive than when you first started. And it'll also be a lot more fact-driven as well, because you've gone through that process to eliminate those assumptions and looked at the reality of the situation. So for me personally, the D and the E stages of this were going to be really critical. I have a real tendency to just get stuck at the B and the C stages. As I say, that paranoia holds me back. I can't see past the possible negative outcomes. And so I just dismiss opportunities or ideas. So if I could get into the habit of actually going through those D and the E stages of looking at the reality of that situation, it could actually lead to some big results for me. It could open up opportunities that I'd always been too scared to go for and lead to some bigger results for me. So at this point, I've got to the stage where I know my strengths. I've got my HBDI profile, I've got my emotional intelligence report, and I've also got a character signature strength survey, which came as part of the original juniors course. And I've identified what I want to work on as my first small changes, the idea of trust and saying yes to more things. So I also went away and undertook some background reading at this point as well. I wanted to know what that buzz factor was about my job, and I wanted to try and figure out what it was that had gone missing and why. And I came to the conclusion that it's all related to the problem solving side of things. And looking back now on my profiles, that's probably not a surprise that it came out as that. But I realized it wasn't just about solving the problems. The real buzz for me came from helping other people to be able to do more as a result of having solved those problems, no matter how small they were. And the reason it had gone missing, well, I'd been doing the job for 2.5 years. I'd got to the point where I'd already, figured out about 75% of those common problems that most customers have. So there was less unique problems in my day job to actually be able to go and solve. So I was getting less of a buzz from it. So all of that took me a few months to figure out. And it's got to the point now where I have everything I want to do written down on paper. I've got my PDP, I've got my action plan I'm going to take against it. It's time to actually start taking action. I need to start living what I'm preaching to myself. And it's slow progress in the beginning. It really is baby steps, and I have to take it one step at a time. So just like the little girl on the slide who's learning to ride her bike, I needed to learn to find my balance. I needed to learn to find the balance between delivering those customer projects to that same high standard I was already doing, and what development opportunities existed out there that I could or should take advantage of. I also needed to learn to control my speed and direction to try and stay on course. So obviously, as you start to find all these new opportunities, everything is shiny and brand new and looks interesting and exciting. And so you go off chasing lots of different things and you end up going off on a tangent all over the place. So I needed to try and stay focused to pick out those particular opportunities that were most critical to me, that would take me towards my particular goals. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I needed to learn how to break. I needed to learn to not take on too much, to not go to the other extreme and just say yes to absolutely everything. So as I say, with all these nice shiny new opportunities, everything looks fantastically interesting and exciting, and you don't want to miss out on any of them. So you start to say yes to more and more things. And before you know it, you look back and find you said yes to 15 different things. And then they all want you to deliver around the same time period. And suddenly there's not enough hours in the day to be able to deliver to the same high standard you normally would do, or to commit 100% effort to them. And so you end up not delivering to that same standard that you would do otherwise. So I started off by picking the easy targets off of my personal development plan. Things like going out and learning about process internally within VMware that helped me understand how my role in PSO fitted into the bigger picture of delivering work to customers. I made a commitment that I was going to take my one-to-ones with my manager, Tim, more seriously. So I was going to prepare in advance of anything that I wanted to discuss. There were going to be no more fluffy conversations. If I wanted to know something, I was going to speak up and ask the question. Likewise, if my manager asked me to take an action and follow up on something, I was actually going to do it. There was going to be no more of the conversations of, well, you know, if I don't actually remind him, he'll just forget about it and then I won't have to do it anyway. It's going to be open and honest with him. And over time, I came to realize that I actually preferred face-to-face one-to-ones. So particularly in the beginning, as I'm trying to build that relationship, it played a crucial part. So I started to ask my manager if we could make just one session a quarter a face-to-face or in-person meeting. And this was obviously pre-COVID days when we were allowed to travel. But it's not an easy thing for us because the role in PSO requires an awful lot of travel. And we're a distributed team across 3 different regions in Northern EMEA. And my manager has a lot of people reporting to him that all require some of his time. So to actually be able to get into the same room as him was actually quite difficult. But it made a big impact, it made a big difference. And it's a multitude of different things. So it's the fact that I knew he committed the same amount of time and effort to be there in that room as I had. I knew I had his full attention for the hour that we were meeting. So obviously when you're on a virtual session like this, it's very easy to have email open, have your internet browser open with Twitter or Slack in my case internally, or even a text message on your phone comes in. And before you know it, without really realizing, you've got distracted and you're not paying full attention to the people that you should actually be listening to. And then obviously being in the same room as him, I could actually see him. So it made a big difference. As I'm trying to get to know him, I could read his nonverbal communication and his body language. So I'd actually be able to see when I said something, how he reacted to it, to actually understand what of an impact I was having as well. I also made a conscious effort that I was going to try and stop and think before I just said no to something, or even to say yes to it. To go through that ABCDE approach, reduce that cynicism and actually ask questions before deciding whether to say yes or no, rather than just instantly going yes, no, whatever I wanted. And then I started to look at ways that I could try and get that buzz factor back into my job. So I went about looking for opportunities that I might have previously overlooked. So in May of last year, I was asked to act as a buddy or an informal mentor to a new starter who's joining our team. So I'd got no previous experience of this. I'd never been anybody's buddy, anybody's mentor, or an informal support system in a working environment. It was all going to be brand new. But I started to get on board with the changes I'm making, and I decided it was an opportunity that was worth taking. So I said yes, and it kicked off a journey in mentoring. So that new starter just happened to be Bilal Ahmed, who likes to have his photo in these slide decks. And he's obviously the Batman and Nando's loving BCDX. And he's very active in the VMware community, particularly in the UK, which didn't describe me at all at that time. And he has a very different personality to me as well. So I found that I learned a lot from the buddy relationship at the same time as he was actually learning from me. So he was learning about how the job of PSO worked and simple things like the expense reports in Concur that he just seemed to have problems with. And I found I was learning from him because I could watch how he approached things. So whether he attempted to say yes to an opportunity, what process he went through before he decided on it, and his reasons why, I could ask him afterwards. And I also saw how he looked at whether or not to maybe go off and learn about something new. So it really helped to accelerate the changes I was already making. Over the course of the year, we had more new people join the team, and I was asked to act as a buddy for another 2 members of staff as well. And in April this year, a 4th new starter joined the team, and I actually volunteered and asked to be their buddy rather than waiting for somebody to ask me if I was interested. And that's the first time I'd actually put my hand up and said, yep, I want the role, please. So I started to show that I was getting on board with the changes I was making. I was becoming more confident about going for opportunities. So that first buddy relationship with Bilal, and he's been with us now for over a year, and we still talk regularly, it kind of gave me the bug for mentoring. And I signed up to an external scheme that was run by Brunel University in London. It's called Women in Brunel Engineering and Computing, or WiBEC using the initials for short. And the scheme basically pairs female engineering and computer science students who are either in their 2nd year or undertaking a master's degree. And it pairs them off with a mentor from an associated industry. It could be computing, could be high tech, could be defense, but all technology related. And they work with the mentor for the academic year. And the idea is to help the students gain some of those skills they need when they go out to the wider world of work. So in my case, I was paired with a 2nd year electrical engineering student, which is the same degree I had undertaken at university myself. But to be honest, it didn't really work out. And it was a combination of different factors. So my student struggled with time management and finding time away from her academic work. At the same time, she wasn't quite sure what she actually wanted to get out of the mentoring relationship. So she didn't know what she wanted to drive towards as a target. And then unfortunately, unexpectedly, the project I was assigned to long-term in London was put on hold. And I ended up working in the northwest of the UK, for a long period of time instead. So suddenly I wasn't in the proximity of the university campus. So all those plans to meet in person were now really difficult because I was 5 hours away. And so we struggled to meet in person, and we didn't really drive that relationship to build the rapport that's needed to underpin that mentoring relationship. But the scheme itself is fantastic, and I was able to help some other university students. I participated in mock interviews, for example, and I've already signed up to take part again this year if student numbers allow enough mentors to be matched. So that WiBEC scheme made me start to think about what it was that drove me to get involved in technology in the first place. And I realised that in my case, it wasn't when I went to university. I'd already come across technology and decided it was the right area for me at a much younger age. I was in primary school when I realised that, I had a real joy of figuring out how things worked or playing with things like Lego, those technical toys. So I started to look for opportunities where maybe I could volunteer with similar age children that had that same kind of passion and drive. And I came across a scheme called Digital Den that was run by my local library. Now, obviously with the COVID situation here in the UK, Digital Den has been on hold since March, and there is no timeline for when it gets to restart. But before it was shut down, it was run once a week on a Friday afternoon after school had finished for the day, and was open to children aged 8 and 11 years old. And the idea is it introduces the children to different types of technology, rather than focusing on just learning how to code, for example, as some other schemes do. And it's a structured program that builds in complexity across the year. So they get to play with the microbits, which are those little circuit boards with the LED lights on them on the left of the screen. And they also get to play with the Ozo bots, which are the little robots that follow the track they're drawing on the paper. And the different colours in the track make the robots do different things as it goes over it. And so it can be incredibly hard work because obviously you're talking about a group of, say, I think it was up to 6 children in total on a Friday afternoon after school is finished for the week. And they can be absolutely hyperactive, particularly if it's been a bad weather day, as often is here in the UK, and they've been stuck inside all day and they haven't been able to burn off any of that energy. But it can also be incredibly rewarding. So there was one boy I helped in one of the early sessions where we were doing the micro bits, and he was absolutely convinced he was never going to be able to do it. To start with, he wasn't going to be able to create this little program by dragging and dropping the bits. It just wasn't going to work. Then he wasn't going to be able to transfer his code across onto the micro bit because it was too complicated. And even if he did, it wasn't going to work. Those lights weren't going to light up. And I sat with him and helped him through that entire session. And as I helped him transfer his code across, and he actually saw that it worked, as those little LEDs lit up, his own face lit up in response. He was suddenly so satisfied with what he'd been able to achieve. When his mum came to collect him at the end of the session, he turned around to her and told her that he'd had the best fun ever. It's an incredible buzz, it's incredibly rewarding, and something that's very difficult to describe, particularly if you're only giving up that 1 hour of your time a week. So alongside the external opportunities, I also started to look at internal options that I may have just previously dismissed. I was looking for something that was going to give me that challenge. It was going to stretch me, force me to get outside my comfort zone, but at the same time, help me get that buzz factor that I just wasn't getting for my customer projects. And so in August last year, I committed to what I saw as a stretch goal at the time. And there's an internal program within VMware called the CTO Ambassadors program, or CTOA for short. And it's quite competitive in terms of how you apply to get into it. And I'd always previously just dismissed it because I didn't think I did anything that was special that would set me apart from anybody else. So there was no reason to apply because I simply wasn't going to get in. But this year, I was starting to get on board with those changes. I was starting to have a different mindset. And actually, I decided that there was a possibility that I may be able to get in. And that even if I didn't, nobody would think anything less of me if I had applied and I didn't get in. They'd probably be grateful for the fact that I actually tried rather than just simply saying no. So I decided not to be driven by that fear and paranoia this time. And so when the email application period opened, I submitted my application. And it took a bit of a push from a couple of key colleagues to actually get me to hit that submit button. But I went ahead and did it. And then it was just going to be a wait until December of that year when the results actually came out and I found out whether I was successful. So that's just some of the highlights of the past couple of years as it now is, thinking back to the fact it's now 2 years since that VMworld where it first kicked off. And that's just some of the things I've learned or I got involved in over the past couple of years. And the thing is, as I look back at this, I realize what huge strides I've made. The problem is there's so much I'd want to talk about. There's so much I could tell you that I've done that's come since that initial sort of conversations. And there's just not enough time to be able to fit it into a session. I could talk for another hour and probably still not cover everything that I've learned. I'm definitely still that work in progress. I'm never going to be a perfect person. And I realize now that nobody actually is. And one of the other things I've realized is that I shouldn't try to compare myself or compete against other people. And the reason I say that is because I'm the only person who has exactly the same experiences as me, exactly the same challenges as me, and exactly the same personality as me. So why try to compare myself to other people? It's just not a level playing field. So obviously there's been some highs and lows along the way. I'm not completely changed. I'm still that cynical individual. And there are still occasions where I just can't help it. I slip back into that mode. But I recognize when it happens. And so I can at least apologize either in advance or after the event if I've just gone into that cynical mode and, just given the flippant answer because I'm just in that kind of situation. But the highs give you that real buzz and they drive you on to go and find that next high to keep it going. So the photo on the slide is from the Octo Global Field and Industry Conference, which was held just before the meltdown started in February of this year in Palo Alto at the VMware headquarters. And this is the result of me committing to that stretch goal of applying to the CTOA program, which led to an acceptance. And this is me attending my first conference. And you can find me just on the right-hand end of the front row of people that are standing, what I like to term as the short person's row. And so this acceptance into the program drove me to then do an application to the vExpert program for the first time, which led to an acceptance. My attendance at the conference put me into contact with people who convinced me to go for my VCDX certification, which, as I said earlier, previously I just didn't see the point of. When I look back now, my one-to-ones with my manager are completely unrecognizable from those fluffy sessions we used to have. It's much more open and honest. I have that trust with him. I trust what he says to me, and I actually go with an open mind now rather than instantly saying no. Sometimes it does take a little bit of poking and prodding. Sometimes he has to raise things 3 or 4 times or let them just percolate in my brain and let me come to the decision before I'll agree to it. But overall, he's almost always right. Being part of that CTOA program has given me that real confidence boost. It's given me a platform to launch myself forward from. This was the first calculated risk I'd taken, and it paid off. It's opened up so many doors to new connections because it's a worldwide program. It's given me new opportunities that come through that program first, and it's given me new ways of thinking and looking at things as well. So there's now more and more opportunities that seem to be opening up to me, and it's not that there is an actual increase. It's just that my mindset has changed. I'm more open now. So that growth mindset, as it's often called, has had an impact. And now some of those opportunities I previously just thought weren't for me seem open and possible. So since returning from Palo Alto, I've been able to present my first ever VMUGs, including the first one in London in April this year. And that ultimately led to me submitting a version of this session to VMworld, which was accepted. I've also been able to present at internal events like Tama Labs, some of which are then made public. I've written an article for the VMware website about what it's like to work in PSO, and I've even recently recorded a podcast episode for the EMEA marketing team. So being part of the CTOA and this new mindset have combined to give me the opportunity to go out and share my story or share my experiences. It's something I hadn't previously thought about ever doing. I always told my manager that I had nothing to say that anybody would possibly want to listen to. And my efforts to date have now been recognised with that promotion, which was confirmed last month. It's also taught me that I haven't quite managed how to figure out the break-in process yet and to not take on too much. So I thought being at home 24/7 during the COVID lockdowns in particular, I thought I'd have lots more free time to get involved in loads of other things. And that was true to a certain extent. However, I'd massively underestimated just how mentally exhausting that was going to be. So as I said earlier, I'm definitely still a work in progress and there's lots of things I need to work at. So that was looking back. That was some of the highlights. But what comes next for me? What does the future hold? Well, in my case, I still don't know. Nothing much has changed from when I originally put this session together. I still haven't figured out what my long-term goal is. I don't know where I want to ultimately end up and what that ideal job or that final job looks like. In the short term, I know where I'm going. I've got my goals identified for at least the first half of next year. I also know some of the areas that I want to improve in or get involved in that go beyond that as well. On a personal level, I'm much happier than I was a year ago. I'm now part of programs and initiatives that I could never imagine myself even applying to, let alone getting accepted into. And it all started off as chasing that promotion, of wanting to know what progression looked like. And it turned into this massive journey of discovery and self-exploration, personal development. So it's no longer about that promotion. As I say, I have that first promotion now, and it's just a tiny part of this journey. I'm not going to go back on all the changes I've made. I'm not going to simply stop because I have a new job title now. There are a few things I do know. I'm committed to try and keep in that open mindset, the growth mindset as it's often referred to. The approach to small changes really works for me, and I'm going to continue to look for those opportunities to develop on a day-by-day basis. I definitely know I couldn't have made it this far without the support of my manager, Tim, and some key colleagues. They've never stopped telling me how great I am, putting me forward for opportunities, pushing me to chase my goals and get outside my comfort zone. I owe them a lot of gratitude. I'm extremely lucky that I have those kind of people around me. I'm also incredibly grateful that the culture of VMware allowed me to go off and do these non-technical training courses at no expense to myself, and to volunteer my time during the normal working week to help as part of the digital den, even though there was no direct benefit to VMware from my volunteering. And finally, I also know what I bring to VMware and my team is more than just my work ethic. I bring a calmness and ability to think clearly, no matter how stressful the situation. I have an ability to see solutions and different ways of achieving an outcome. I also hope I now have the ability to help others to find their feet and their voice so that they can go on and fulfill their potential. And finally, I believe I have an ability and a potential to go anywhere that I want to in the future. So to end this session, I just want to leave you with a few things to think about. Do you really know who you are, what your strengths are, and how they impact the way you work with other people? So if you think about it, we live in a world now where somebody can go off and find the answer to a technical question on the first page of a Google search, probably 8 times out of 10. So now it's going to be your personal skills that really set you apart from other people and make you stand out. Your technical knowledge is still important, but it'll be how you implement that knowledge that will make the difference. So what do you do to invest in your personal skills? As a technical community, we obviously spend a lot of time and investment in keeping our technical skills up to date. We go on those training courses, we practice our skills in our home labs, and we blog about it. So don't neglect your personal skills. Don't close yourself off to learning something new. Don't be afraid to try something new on the personal development side. Go off and do the training or the background reading. Practice those skills so that you don't lose them. Don't be like me. Don't close your mind off to those new opportunities. Don't learn it the hard way. And remember, like me, it's never too late in your career to start. Consider if that small changes approach could work for you. So you don't have to get bogged down by looking only at the areas that you think are your weaknesses, as I originally identified in my case. Improving a strength or something that's on the edge of your strengths can also lead to some big results. So just take the time to think, is there maybe 1 or 2 things that you could identify that you could do just that little bit better? And if you add more and more of them, as I say, those results will start to snowball. Finally, figure out what it is that you love. Figure out your why. Figure out what gives you that buzz factor, and then look for ways that you can amplify it. So it doesn't have to be related to your job. It doesn't have to be related to technology even. figure out what it is, and be amazed by the impact it can have on you when you start to amplify that buzz factor. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. I hope that you found it interesting, and that maybe there's one or two things in there that you either recognize in yourself or you can relate to because you've seen it in other people. So in case anybody is interested, I've just left an updated list of some of the books I've read over the past couple of years, or in the case of the last 2 books on the list, the ones I'm currently trying to read. I'd also recommend that if you liked this presentation and thought the style was very different to what you may have seen before, there's an on-demand session from the VMworld 2020 catalogue that I'd recommend. So it was run by 2 of my colleagues in the CTO Ambassadors program, and it was actually why I got the original idea that led to my VMUG session in April, and then the recommendation to read the presentation Zen book that led to the format of my slide deck. So that session is ETPD for Emerging Trends Personal Development, 1361, Outstanding Presentations, How to Improve Your Presentation Skills. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll take a look and see if there's any comments or questions to respond to. If you do think of anything later or you want to know more information, obviously my details were available on the slide deck. It will be recorded. Twitter @skillk01. You can find me on LinkedIn just under Katherine Skilling. So yeah, feel free to connect with me, send me a message privately, or send me a tweet about the session. I'll be glad to know your feedback. Thank you very much everyone for attending. I really appreciate it.